Some time ago, I asked you guys to fill out a survey about what your dream Fallout game would look like. This is a remake of an older survey I made back in 2022, with a few new questions thrown into the mix. About 1,052 of you have responded, noticeably higher than the prior survey. Like the last, I'll read the results, give you guys the numbers and the charts, throw in a few select open responses where people describe their dream game story and gameplay elements, as well as present some observations. Now, let's begin. The first question I asked when it came to their dream game was which established Fallout gameplay style would be the most similar to what they wanted. The two winning answers were Fallout 3/New Vegas and Fallout 4/76. 3 in New Vegas won 42.6% compared to the 35.7% of 4 in 76. And Classic Fallout was able to snag 7.5%, or rather 78 votes. Among the others, it was common to say a mix of Fallout 4 and New Vegas together, which is a repeating theme across all the different surveys I have done. When asked if it would be single player, multiplayer, MMO, co-op, etc., the supermajority said single player with 73.2%. Co-op took 16.2%. Most of the others said single player with optional co-op. Asking how much backstory the player character would have, the answers had 3 major points that stuck out. Multiple choice backstory at 23%, a blank canvas at 31.3%, and the winning crown of 33.1% for some loose history discussing occupation. Next, I got into the power armor questions. The preferred power armor gameplay was Fallout 4's mech style at a supermajority of 75.2%. With traditional taking 15.1%, about 5.1% said they did not prefer power armor at all. Jumping over to the question about power armor training, it seems that most want the perk to return at 54.3%, while 26.5% wish to turn it into a skill. 11.2% would not bring the perk back, and a select few said they would discard power armor with 2% of the vote. The topic of fusion cores was next. The supermajority wanted to keep the fusion core system for their dream game, and the majority of those wanted to alter it in some form. 24% wished to discard fusion cores, and 1.9%, or 20 votes, wanted to discard power armor entirely. Moving on, I asked if the player would choose a faction in the main questline. A supermajority, 83.9%, said yes, and with multiple options. 3.6% said there would be a faction to choose, but it's a binary choice. Another 3.6% said the narrative would compel the player character to stick to a single one, and 3.5% said there would not be a faction in the main questline. Next, I asked which major city the game would take place in. I listed a number of popular locations I saw suggested over the years, but naturally I missed quite a few. There are a lot of places people want to go to. The most popular one was Chicago at 11.8%. Well, technically the most popular was the other category, but you know. Then it was New Orleans at 9.9%, and then New York City at 9.7%. One guy said all of Canada, and another said the whole of Europe and Yugoslavia. These would be pretty big maps. Then I asked how civilized they want their wasteland to be. The majority, at 59%, said growing nations with powerful armies, akin to Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 2. Small settlements with weak governing bodies got 27.3%, and 3.1% voted for complete anarchy. Moving on, I asked what time the setting would be. I probably should have changed the wording to time frame, but regardless, the majority, at 53.4%, said they wanted sometime around Fallout 3, New Vegas, and Fallout 4. The next biggest choice, at 14.2%, said their setting would be sometime around Fallout 2. I don't know why I found that interesting. I asked if the dream game would have FEV involved. Most, at 36.2%, said it would not. As you can see, a few of these others were fairly colorful variations of no. Another batch said no, but something similar at 21%. Whether that's simply a store brand, mutagen, or something more clever can't be gauged by this question alone. And some did want FEV. 25.6% said a strain from another game, and 11.2% said new strain. On a similar topic, the majority wanted super mutants. The most popular batch chose to have them migrated there at 44.4%. 10.7 said they want them to be created in the region, 18.2 said they just want something similar, and finally 18.4 said there would not be super mutants in their dream game. Jumping over, I shifted the question to the Brotherhood of Steel. The results were somewhat similar. Most said they have a small outpost at 41.5%, 13.7% said they'd have a large chapter in the region, 14.5% said there wouldn't be a BOS group, but would have something similar. Finally, 23.2% simply denied the idea of the group altogether. The same question was asked, but for the Enclave. 30.1 said they have a small outpost, 20% said they have a large chapter, 15.8 said no but something similar, and 27.7 gave a definite no. Deathclaws were next, and they were considered a lot more acceptable to people, with the majority saying yes a little in terms of quantity of Deathclaws, at 56.2. A lot grabbed 13.1%, and no something similar grabbed 20.1%. Finally, about 6% gave a hard no, the smallest share of the no's. Here comes a batch of newer questions. First, I asked if there would be aliens. 36.4% said they'd be hinted at but never confirmed. 34.5% said aliens would play an insignificant role. You know, I actually just copied and pasted this question 2 more times while editing the subject. I don't know how this one got the typo given it was the first one. Anyway, 10.8% said no aliens, but there would be mutants that have an otherworldly appearance and or abilities. 10.3% gave a hard no, and finally 3.4% said aliens would play a prominent part of their game. Next, the same question but for ghosts. 42.6% said ghosts are hinted at but never confirmed. 18.6% gave a harder no. 18% said ghosts would play an insignificant role. 14.3% voted that mutants would have ghost-like look and or abilities. Finally, 3.8% said ghosts would play a prominent part of their game. Finally, psychers. Strangely, psychers got the highest threshold of no's and the highest threshold of yes, with both insignificance and significance. 21.2% said no, 12.7% said yes and prominently, and 35.7% said yes but insignificant. All 3 of these are the highest of their categories. This is made up by the fact that this group also had the lowest amount of hinted at but never confirmed, while with the ghosts and aliens, that category was their biggest share. That's really interesting. What's less interesting is I made a typo for the word psyker twice. Good grief, do I need to start double checking these things. Moving back to some of the older questions. I asked what the currency system would look like. The most chosen answer, at 46.9%, was different currencies depending on the ruling faction of an area. 26.3% said to stick to caps, 19.9% wanted different currency for that region. The smallest group, at 2.2%, said there would be no currency but a pure bartering system. Next, would they bring back weapon degradation? The majority, at 65.8%, said they want to bring back the system, while 28.3% said they would not. Most of the others simply said they want to ensure it's manageable and weapons are repairable. In the last multiple choice question, I simply asked if the survey takers would give me permission to use their written ideas in future videos. 64.2% said yes, 1% said no, and 34.9% claimed they wouldn't be giving me a written response, so this question was irrelevant to them. Next, we'll move on to some select ideas. About 3 or so sounds like a good amount, typically what I did for these videos. The first comes from WintersaileMiniatures. This one is based in New Orleans. Let's begin with the plot. I admit I'm a little biased, as they started off mentioning how I pointed out that in Fallout 4, we really don't do much in a pre-war intro, and they wanted to expand on that note. They start their game off with the player being a soldier during the Resource War, raiding a hidden Chinese lab in America. The player would fight through the lab with a team against a horde of Chinese soldiers, along with some American soldiers and citizens. The boss fight for this intro would feature a soldier in a stealth suit. Upon victory, you collect the documents about the experiments, and wouldn't you know it, the bombs drop. The player dies but wakes up, transferred into a new body. Character creation begins. The plot continues with the player trying to figure out how they got mentally transported into the far nuclear future and all the happenings and adventures that the wasteland offers a protagonist. Among such is learning how the lab's experiments have spread into the said wasteland. The lab dealt with the mind, methods of brainwashing and enslaving Americans to become an internal fighting force, destroyed from within. The strangest part is the transference. The player discovers that one of the scientists have learned that the bombs were dropping and activated an escape device that, through the power of science fiction, swapped the minds into a new body in the far future, favoring blood descendants. In the haste of panic, the scientist wound up sending the stealth soldier, the player, and herself rather than just herself. The stealth suits guy is the first and the reason the experiment started to reappear, maybe creating that game's BOS or Enclave. They also noted they liked the idea of the stealth suit guy getting reincarnated as the scientist's twin. As for gameplay, they wanted to have uniquely unique of uniqueness, weapons and the like. WinterSaile really enjoyed hunting them down in prior games. They also liked the idea of having the settlement system being reconfigured into a faction system, like a merc group, including bases, which either can be made or be repurposed landmarks. Not too many locations though. The home base would allow the player to recruit new members and generate raiding quests, which may be done by the player or some of the recruits. Ideally, this would be an actual event that happens in the world, as in you can physically find the factions doing the job. They want to add that this would be like New Vegas, as in different endings. Use your own group or join one. In addition, they mentioned the faction could be used to fight against the Stealth Suit Guys faction. There's zones held by other factions. I'm imagining something like San Andreas. Borders touching may trigger seams like ham radio chatter about conflicts. The Stealth Suit Guide could be interacted in this manner without quest markers. Overall, WintersaileMiniatures wants the world to feel alive and believes this would be a solution to Skyrim or Fallout 4's "I'm the big boss now after just joining this faction" problem. I gotta admit, I really like the faction system idea for this. For a series so focused on factions as of late, it's a bit strange we don't just start one in some manner. And the interactivity aspect would be fun. While not mentioned, naming would be a problem. While the name could simply be typed out, they wouldn't be referenced in dialogue beyond us and you guys. Maybe choose from a list of names that get stated every once in a while. Next, we talk about the New York-based dream game by NerdyPlayz 1304. They felt that the game should follow the vibes of Fallout 3 pretty heavily, with subways, sewers, and close quarters. The player's role in this world would be smaller than something like Fallout 4. No General of the Minutemen or anything like that, but rather the player simply gets involved in something bigger than themselves. The Enclave would make their big return and be a good backdrop for what America was, corrupt and powerful. And since they were already mentioned, the Minutemen would be the second main faction, as they are a thematic foil to the Enclave and survive in all of Fallout 4's endings. They're also Nerdy's personal favorite faction. So the Enclave gained more power and the Minutemen have spread out, though the Minutemen take the role of the underdog. The player has to choose between an effective yet corrupt Enclave and the relatively inexperienced ideological Minutemen. The area of post-war New York City would be similar to Fallout 3's ruins, dangerous and cold. They're standing skyscrapers, and the Empire State Building is the base of the Enclave. The player can either help the Enclave in asserting order in New York by destroying the last standing bridge connecting Manhattan to Long Island, or help the Minutemen to allow free passage for the inhabitants of Long Island. There's also a stalemate ending where the bridge is retained, but the Enclave sets up a checkpoint system. Nerdy finishes up by mentioning that there could be familiar faces from 3 and 4, and notes that the Institute is likely destroyed in the canon ending of Fallout 4. As for gameplay, Nerdy states that we like a more fleshed out survival mode, including elements implemented in 76, the refined gunplay of 4, and New Vegas style of dialogue, and they would want to return to the voice protagonist despite controversy. In addition, they would like a fleshed out settlement system, a refined Fallout 4 style perk system that mixes the skill system like Starfield, plenty of companions at once, and co-op. So one thing I do want to mention with the plot of this game idea, I don't think many people would be tempted to choose the Enclave in this potential dilemma. Most people play good. Unless you also heavily revise the Enclave, or they're simply fans of that group, or they just felt like doing an evil run, about 80 to 90% of the time, they'll pick Minutemen. Narrative stated capability often matters less than presentation. Between these two, you'll have to soften the Enclave image extensively and harden the Minutemen more. Maybe add a few jerk-off characters to the Minutemen and a few polite ones to the Enclave. That's if you want to focus on the idea of dilemma. If that's not the biggest concern, then don't worry about it. Finally, we'll look at BlundyBrother's Chicago game. They did not write down the gameplay, but did the plot idea. This will be the first Fallout in the Midwest, and since Chicago has been mentioned plenty of times before, it works. Blundy was set up between Fallout 2 and Fallout 3, likely 2255. The main faction is the Enclave, the dominant one in most towns on the map. This would be a different chapter of the Enclave coming off a major loss in the West Coast. They aren't as hell-bent on purifying the wasteland, more focused on just rebuilding civilization, while still beating the shady organization that they are behind the curtains. The Midwest BOS would be the main enemy, naturally. They would be a mix of the West Coast and tactics, taking on new recruits but retaining the tech cult harshness. There would be other factions to support in the main questline, such as a renegade section of the Enclave based around psychers made from an FEV strain from the West Coast. There will be at least 2 more, but Blundy has to think about it. Still plenty of other factions to support, with the good, the bad, and the ugly. The player character is new to the region. There's a backstory made from a couple of multiple choice questions, though there's also the option of unknown. They are sucked into the conflict at some point in the main story after investigating the appearance of a new creature and or people with seemingly supernatural abilities. Props for going in on the psyker bit, a lot of people don't do that. I noticed that you mentioned the West Coast FEV strain being what did it. This might be workable. If the Enclave had any information about the Master's experiment, they could simply use the strain from Fallout 1 as he did an experiment on the psychers. An easy explanation. Likely something you're aware of, naturally, but a mention for anyone watching who may not be aware of it. Now let's close this up by going back to the numbers. The results with this variant of the Dream Game survey and the last one are very similar, but there's some noteworthy differences. For starters, the first question. The ground gained by Fallout 4's gameplay style was actually sizable, jumping up 11 points at 35.7 compared to 24.7. And hey, Classic Fallout gained a solid 1.3 as well. In addition, the number of people who wanted the Power Armor training perk brought back sharply rose from 38.8 to 54.3%. In fact, in the past, turning into a skill was the most popular option. The skill choice was 41.5%, and that fell to 26.5%. What a difference the years make. And New York City was the most popular answer for a possible location, with Chicago taking second place. Now Chicago is number 1, and New York fell to third, and New Orleans is the second. But to be fair, these 3 choices merely play musical chairs, as they were the top 3 choices both times. But those were merely interesting differences. For the new questions, evidently, psychers are considered more acceptable to most people when compared to ghosts and aliens. There's at least plenty of people who feel they're fine for Fallout at some level, rather than simply being hinted at, which makes sense. They were in their first Fallout game, though isolated to the Masters of Fallout as a failed experiment. Then again, while they claimed the most yeses, they also claimed the most hard no's. They're an interesting thing for me. They make sense because they can be created by mutations, but the line between fantasy and science fiction is really thin when it comes to psychic abilities. And finally, things I learned for myself. I really need to double check what I write. And evidently, making a video strictly to advertise a survey while tacking them on to the end of other videos is really helpful for increasing the amount of responses that I get. This is the most I got out of all my surveys, so I'll likely do that again. Anyway, that was the Fallout Dream Games of 2024. Sad that your dream game didn't get shown this round? Don't be. I'll likely throw up some other videos showing off more of them in the future, like I did with these videos. And a special thanks to my channel members, especially my members, ThriceOver members, like that crazy game developer and Danny McPhee. If you'd like to support me and join as well, I'd be more than happy. Otherwise, like, share, subscribe, all that typical YouTube stuff. Thank you. Have a good one.